There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. Not the big planned moments, not graduations or weddings or the day you sign a lease on your first apartment. The real splitting moments are the ones that ambush you on an ordinary night when you are just trying to do your job and get home to your daughter. I was standing in a borrowed dress, checking a catering timeline, trying to be invisible. That was all I wanted, to be invisible, collect my paycheck, and be home before Lily's bedtime. I was not looking for trouble. I was not looking for anything except the exit. But trouble had already found me before I walked through those doors. It just hadn't shown its face yet. What happened next, in front of 100 people, under crystal chandeliers, in the most prestigious room in the city, changed my life in ways I am still finding words for. A man I used to love put his hand around my throat. And a man I had never seen before rolled up his sleeves. What that second man did next is the reason I am still here to tell this story. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, I need you to stay with me. Because this story does not end where you think it ends. It goes deeper, gets darker, and then becomes something I never could have written for myself if I had tried. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where you are watching from. I want to know who is in this with me tonight. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because this is only the beginning and you do not want to miss what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the night everything changed. The Harmon Children's Foundation Gala was the kind of event that made ordinary people feel like they had wandered into the wrong century. Crystal chandeliers hanging from 30-foot ceilings. White roses on every surface. Women in gowns that cost more than my monthly rent standing beside men who had buildings named after them. I was not a guest. I want to make that clear. I was working the last-minute replacement event coordinator hired by the planning company after their original person quit without notice. I needed the money badly enough to say yes without thinking twice. My name is Maya. I was 29 years old, recently divorced, and the sole provider for my 5-year-old daughter Lily, who wore hearing aids with star stickers on them and drew dragons on every surface she could find. Lily was my entire world. She was also the reason I had said yes to a job I knew in my gut I should have turned down. Her hearing aids had cracked 3 weeks before. The replacement cost was not covered by insurance. I had already sold my laptop and cut the grocery budget to almost nothing. When my supervisor called and said the Harmon Gala needed a last-minute coordinator at 3 times our normal rate, I hesitated for exactly 4 seconds. Then I thought about Lily pressing her hands to her ears and telling me she could not hear the birds anymore. I said yes. I knew the Harmon name. Everyone in the city did. Marcus and Eleanor Harmon had spent 30 years building a real estate empire, wrapping it in charitable foundations and using their money to make themselves untouchable. Their son Derek had married me when I was 25. For almost 3 years, I had lived inside a very beautiful, very expensive cage. I will not describe all of it here. What I will say is that there was a staircase. There was an emergency room. There was a doctor who believed my explanation because by that point I had become very good at delivering it. When I finally left, I left with Lily, 1 suitcase, and so much debt from Derek's legal retaliation that some mornings I could barely breathe through the weight of it. I checked the approved guest list before I accepted the contract. Derek was not on it. He was supposed to be in another city. I told myself it would be fine. But Derek Harmon had always moved through the world as though rules were written for other people. I knew that better than anyone. I should have listened to what I knew. My phone buzzed on the drive to the gala. A message from his number. 7 words. Leave before cocktail hour or you'll regret it. I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about Lily's hearing aids. I thought about the cracked casing and the sound of her voice when she said she could not hear clearly anymore. I put the phone in my bag. I walked into the building. For 2 hours I kept my head down, arranged flowers, checked timelines, smiled at people who looked through me like I was part of the decor. I was invisible, exactly as planned. Then I turned a corner near the service corridor, and Derek was already there. He had that look. The one I had learned to read before I understood what it meant. The one where his eyes went flat and his jaw went tight and everything warm left the room. He said I should not be there. I said his name carefully, the way you speak to something dangerous. I told him I was only working, that I would stay out of his way. His hand moved before I finished the sentence. His fingers closed around my throat. The champagne glass I was holding hit the marble floor. The sound echoed through the entire East Wing like a crack of thunder. 100 people turned and froze. I clawed at his hand. My vision blurred. Lily's name ran through my head, not out loud, just there, the way it always came when I was most afraid. Then a voice. Quiet. Carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Take your hand off her. Derek's grip loosened. He turned. I stumbled backward and grabbed the pillar beside me, gasping, trying to stay upright. Standing 15 feet away was a man I had never seen before. He was in a black fitted suit. He wasn't large in a way that announced itself. He wasn't shouting. He hadn't rushed forward. He was simply standing there, both sleeves already rolled to the forearm, watching Derek with an expression of complete and total calm. Every single person in that room who recognized his face had taken one silent step backward. Derek turned to face him, and I watched something happen that I had never once seen in 3 years of marriage. Derek Harmon went still. Not angry still. Afraid still. The man in the black suit did not move again. He just held Derek's gaze and waited. Derek lowered his hand. I would learn his name later that night. Sung Jin. Most people who knew him well enough to speak to him at all called him Mr. Sung. He was 38 years old. His public record was clean, private real estate investment, a portfolio of properties across 4 states, a reputation for efficiency and silence. His other record was something the city's law enforcement was aware of and had, for reasons that would only become clear much later, chosen not to act on. He was at the Harmon Gala that night for reasons that had nothing to do with charity. He was there because he had been watching the Harmon Foundation for over a year. He had come to confirm one final detail before setting something much larger into motion. He had not planned to get involved with anyone. He had not planned to step forward. But when my champagne glass shattered and 100 people reached for their phones instead of moving, he set down his water glass, straightened his jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. His aide would tell me later that in 10 years of working for him, she had never once seen him do that at a public event. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back 6 hours, because what happened at that gala did not start in that corridor. I had noticed Jean earlier in the evening. That matters, because people would later assume I only became aware of him in the moment he stepped forward. But I had been watching him without knowing why for most of the night. He stood near the far window of the main hall. Dark suit. 1 glass of water, never champagne like everyone else. He wasn't working the room the way every other powerful man there was. The handshakes, the laughing too loud, the careful positioning near whoever held the most influence that season. He was completely still in the way that only very calm or very dangerous people manage to be still. I asked my colleague Priya about him during the second catering check. She had worked high-end events in the city for 8 years. I trusted her read on people. She looked across the room at him and then looked quickly away. She said, "Don't make eye contact with that one." I wanted to ask more. but something in the set of her shoulders told me the conversation was over. Now back to the corridor. Back to Derek's hand leaving my throat and Gene standing there with his sleeves rolled up and the entire east wing of the Gala holding its breath. Gene straightened his jacket. He walked to me. His expression had shifted, not warm exactly, but the coldness in it was different. Deliberate rather than cruel. He said quietly, "Sit down. Someone will bring you water." Then he crossed the room to the Harmon family table. I watched him lean down and say something close to Eleanor Harmon's ear. I couldn't hear what it was. I couldn't read his lips. But I watched Eleanor's face, this woman who had managed senators and buried scandals and made herself the most untouchable figure in the city, go from its usual composure to the color of cold ash in about 3 seconds. She grabbed her husband's arm. At the far end of the table, Derek, who had drifted back toward his family, sat down without being asked. Gene returned to where I was sitting. Someone had brought water. He watched me drink it without speaking. Then he said, "Your fee for tonight has been doubled. Finish your shift. No one will touch you." I didn't know whether to thank him or run. Before I could decide, Derek appeared again at the edge of the room. He didn't come close. He looked not at me but at Gene. "You don't know what you just stepped into," Derek said. Gene glanced at him the way you glance at something minor. Then he turned away without a word and walked back into the crowd. I finished my shift. I drove home. I sat in my car outside my building for 15 minutes with my hands on the wheel, trying to decide if what had happened was real. I went upstairs. I checked on Lily, asleep in her room with her star sticker hearing aids on the nightstand and her dragon drawings taped to every wall. I stood in her doorway for a long time. Then I went to bed and spent most of the night staring at the ceiling. By morning, everything had already gotten worse. I woke up to 47 missed calls. A gossip blog was running a blurry photo of Derek's hand around my throat captioned, "Harmon heir loses control at charity gala." My lawyer had called 4 times. 3 unknown numbers. And 1 message from Derek's legal team, already threatening defamation action if I made any public statement. I was still sitting on the edge of my bed reading through all of it when a black car pulled up outside my building. A woman in a neat gray coat stepped out, walked to my door, and buzzed my unit. I went down. She handed me an envelope and said, "Mr. Sung wanted you to have this." Then she got back in the car. I opened it on the stairs. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount was exact, to the dollar, what Derek's legal team had taken from my savings over 14 months of fighting the divorce. I had never told anyone that number. I had barely admitted it fully to myself. There was no note. I stood on those stairs for a long time. I did not understand how he knew. I did not understand what it meant. I turned the check over as if the back would explain something. My phone rang. It was my mother. A man had come to her door that morning asking about Lily's school schedule. Polite. Said he was from a community outreach program. She had not answered his questions. She called me the moment he left. My stomach dropped. That man was not from Jin's side. I would find that out very soon. That man was from Derek's. Lily had no idea any of this was happening. She woke up that morning and asked for pancakes and spent a full 20 minutes explaining to our cat why dinosaurs would have made far superior household pets. She was 5 years old, and she was the most fearless person I had ever known. She had been born with partial hearing loss in both ears. Moderate, the doctors said, significant enough to affect her speech development without intervention, manageable with the right support. By the time she was 3, she had hearing aids, a speech therapist, and an attitude about the whole situation that could only be described as completely unimpressed. She wore her hearing aids the way other children wore jewelry. She had decorated them herself with tiny star stickers she peeled off a sheet she got from the dentist. She called Derek the loud man. Not out of fear, just observation. He was always too sharp and too loud, and she had clocked it early the way children clock the things adults spend years pretending not to notice. She had never once asked where he went after I left him. I was making her breakfast when she found the cashier's check on the counter. She picked it up and studied the number with the absolute focus she brought to everything she considered important. "Is that enough for my ears, Mommy?" she asked. I turned to the stove so she would not see my face. I told her, "Yes, baby. More than enough." I cried in the bathroom with the fan running so she would not hear it. I was still composing myself when Jin's aide called. The same woman from the black car. Professional and calm. I demanded to know about the man asking questions at my mother's house. She said, "That was our people verifying whether Derek's team was already watching your daughter's location." They were. A car has been parked outside her daycare for 3 days. It is registered to a shell company connected to the Harmon family. The phone felt very heavy in my hand. I asked why. "Leverage," she said simply. I went and picked Lily up from daycare an hour early that day. I did not explain why. She did not ask. She just held my hand the whole way home and talked about a book her teacher had read about a girl who tamed a sea monster and whether sea monsters were real, and if they were real whether they would be friendly or mean, and whether friendliness in sea monsters would depend on how they were raised. I listened to every word. I held her hand tighter than necessary. That evening I did the last thing I had expected myself to do. I went to Jean. I don't know exactly what made me walk into that building. Maybe the car outside the daycare. Maybe the cashier's check. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I was just so tired of being the only person in any room who could see clearly what was being done to me, and for once there was someone else who could see it too. His building was in the financial district. Glass and steel and a lobby designed to make visitors feel small. The receptionist looked at me the way people look at something that clearly does not belong. 2 men in dark jackets stepped forward before I reached the elevator. I said, "Tell him the woman from the Gala is here and she has a question." They looked at each other. One made a call. 2 minutes later, I was in an elevator going up. His office was not what I expected. Quiet. One large window looking over the city. A desk with almost nothing on it. He was standing when I walked in, jacket off, reviewing something on a laptop. He looked up, closed it, and waited. I placed the envelope on his desk. I said I had come to return it. He looked at it. Did not touch it. I asked him directly, "Why did you help me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then instead of answering, he told me something else. He told me the Harmon Foundation was not what it appeared to be. That the charitable work, the galas, the names on hospital wings, it was a structure built on top of something much darker. He told me he had been watching it for a long time. He told me enough that my hands went cold. I had come to return the check. I left without it. On my way out, I passed a man coming in through the lobby. He glanced at me, looked away, then looked back. I did not know him. I walked to my car. What I did not know is that before I reached the parking garage, he had already made a call. For words, the ex-wife knows. Eleanor Harmon did not panic when she received that message. She never panicked. That was exactly what made her dangerous. While I slept that night, she was already organizing. By 6 the next morning, she had assembled a PR crisis team to manage the Gala photographs. She had a private investigator assigned to me, my address, my workplace, my daily movements. She had called a family court judge she had known personally for over 2 decades. And she had instructed Derek's legal team to file for emergency custody of Lily. The strategy was clean and horrible. Inconsistent employment. Recent trauma. Questionable associations, meaning Gene. One single visit to his office building was enough to be twisted, on paper, into a single mother deliberately linking herself to organized crime. They had also arranged for a specific custody evaluator. A man named Dr. Leon Penn. I did not know his name yet. I was served the custody papers at work. The process server walked into the dental office lobby and asked for me by name. 3 of my coworkers were standing right there. I read the words unfit mother on the second page and the rest blurred. I stood in that hallway and I felt the same helplessness I had felt in the Gala corridor, that specific kind that comes when someone with far more power decides to use all of it. But this time there was no one nearby to say take your hand off her. I drove home. I fed Lily dinner. I read her a story. I tucked her in. I waited until she was asleep. Then I looked at the custody paperwork again. At the name of the assigned evaluator. I had seen that man before. He had been standing near the Harmon family table at the gala. Gene found out about the custody filing within hours of it being submitted. I did not ask how. By that point I had moved past being surprised by what his network could access. What I was told later was this. He was in a meeting when his aide brought him the document. He read it standing. He set it down on the conference table. He dismissed the room. His aide, the only person in his employ who had worked with him long enough to read his silences accurately, waited until everyone cleared out and then asked carefully whether this was still about the Foundation investigation. Gene stood at the window for a long moment. Then he said, "No." That single word changed the shape of everything that followed. While I was sitting at my kitchen table that night trying to breathe through the paperwork, his team was already running a full background check on Dr. Leon Penn. What they found was not subtle. Penn had filed custody evaluations in 7 cases over the past 4 years where the Harmon family had a financial interest. He had ruled against the non-Harmon party every single time. He carried a gambling debt of over $180,000. And there was a secondary bank account in a different name that had been receiving regular monthly deposits for 2 years, deposits that started the exact same month Penn began appearing on cases linked to the Harmon family's legal team. Gene relayed all of this through his aide in a call the following morning. Calm, precise, no editorializing. He said, "The system they are using is not accidental. It was built deliberately. But every bot system has parts that were never for sale. We find those parts." I was writing everything down. My hand was steady, which surprised me. Then my phone buzzed with another call. An unrecognized number. I answered. It was Dr. Penn himself, calling after business hours in a voice that was strange and tight, as though he had rehearsed what he was about to say and was not fully comfortable with it. He used careful, indirect language. He said he hoped I was thinking clearly about my situation, that he hoped I understood the value of keeping things simple. He was warning me to back down. I hung up. I called Gene. I reported the call word for word. He said, "Record any future calls from him. Send them to me immediately." The custody evaluation was scheduled for Thursday. It was Monday evening. We had less than 72 hours. Jin's team had also, in those same 48 hours, been tracking a second thread. Before Derek ever met me, there was a woman named Grace. I did not know her full story yet. I only knew fragments, that something had happened 8 years ago, that the Harmon family had paid a significant amount of money to make it disappear, and that there was a sealed court record that had been quietly buried in a legal structure so layered it had taken Jin's team months to locate it. What Derek had done to Grace before he ever met me was bad enough that the settlement had been $340,000. The Harmon family had not paid that money to protect Derek. Eleanor had paid it to own him. His shame became her leash. Every time Derek showed signs of independence, every time he weakened, Eleanor had that sealed record to remind him who held the real power. Grace had rebuilt her life in another city. Carefully. Quietly. She had never spoken publicly. Jin's lawyer appeared at her door on Tuesday morning, not to threaten her, not to use her, but to ask one question. If someone could legally break the NDA and guarantee her safety, would she be willing to speak? I was told she was silent for almost a full minute. Then she said she had been waiting for someone to ask her that for 8 years. I did not know about Grace yet when I had my darkest night. It happened on Tuesday, after Penn's call. After I had spent the day staring at paperwork and trying to calculate whether there was any version of Thursday's evaluation that ended in my favor. I sat on the floor of Lily's bedroom after she fell asleep, and I let all of it come up at once. Every piece I had held down since the gala. Every piece from before it. The staircase. The emergency room. The years of explaining things so thoroughly I had half believed my own explanations. I cried until I ran out of it. Then I sat in the quiet and listened to Lily breathe. I called my mother. She stayed on the line through the silence. Then she said, "You have been surviving for a long time. Surviving and living are not the same thing. You have always been the second kind of woman. You just keep forgetting it." I looked at Lily sleeping. Dragon drawings on the wall. Star stickers on the nightstand. Something changed in my posture. Physically, visibly. I felt it shift. I picked up my phone and called Gene at 1 in the morning. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Tell me everything I need to do. I am ready." A pause. Then, "Before I do that, there is something you need to know about why I was really at that gala." He told me the truth. All of it in order, without performance or apology. The Harmon Foundation's money laundering was real. He had known about it for over a year. But his reason for caring was not professional. It was personal. He had a younger brother. His name was Kong. 6 years ago, Kang had been involved at the edges of a business arrangement that went wrong in a way that got him killed. The trail, through layers of shell companies and intermediary accounts, led back to a financial network connected to the Harmon Foundation. Gene had spent 6 years building toward a reckoning. Not for law enforcement. For something quieter and more complete. He was at the gala to confirm one final piece of the puzzle before setting everything in motion. He had not planned to step forward when a woman's champagne glass shattered. He had not planned to involve himself with anyone. He told me this with complete flatness. No romance in the telling, no attempt to make himself look better than he was. When he finished, I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "So you are not a good man." "No," he said. "But you are not going to let them take my daughter." "No." "Then we understand each other," I said. He was quiet. "Then, there is something else." My inside source at the foundation, someone who has been feeding information to my team for 8 months, went silent this afternoon. Their last message was 3 words. A pause. They found me. The source was a woman named Claire. She had been a mid-level accountant at the Harmon Foundation for 4 years. She had stumbled onto the financial irregularities 2 years in, and had spent the following 2 years documenting them in secret, frightened and isolated, with no clear plan for what to do with what she was building. For the last 8 months, she had been feeding that documentation to Jin's team through a carefully maintained secure channel. Eleanor Harmon had apparently arrived at Claire's apartment with 2 foundation board members and a pleasant suggestion that she come to the Harmon estate for a few days to rest and recover. Claire's phone had been collected at the door. Her access to the outside world was gone. What made this devastating beyond the loss of a source was what Claire had been holding. Not just transaction records, full documentation. Account names. Transfer dates. the names of every person who had authorized each movement of funds. Jin's team had known the file existed for months. They had not been able to find where she had stored it. Now Eleanor Harmon knew someone had been using it. And if Eleanor found the file first, it would disappear the way everything threatening to the Harmon family disappeared. Quietly. Without a trace. The custody hearing was in 36 hours. Then Jin's aide forwarded something to my phone at midnight. A new filing from Derek's legal team, an emergency addendum to the custody case submitted that evening. Attached were 7 surveillance photographs. All of them showed me entering Jin's office building. The addendum language was precise and ugly. It alleged I maintained consistent contact with a known associate of organized criminal enterprise, bringing into serious question my judgment and the safety of my child. I stared at the photos. One visit. They had turned one visit into a weapon. By morning it was everywhere. 3 media outlets ran the story at the same time, which told me clearly it was not a leak. It was a coordinated release. The headlines were variations on the same theme: custody battle, mother linked to crime figure. Child's safety in question. My coworkers stared when I arrived. My landlord left a voicemail. Lily's daycare sent a careful email about reviewing enrollment status pending further information. I drove to Jin's building instead of going inside my office. He was watching the coverage when I arrived. His team was in response mode. He turned off the television when I walked in. I expected him to say it had become too complicated, too much exposure, that he was stepping back. He said, "Grace landed this morning. She is with my lawyer," he said, and Claire got a message out. He placed a sheet of paper on the desk. On it was a 14-character encrypted file name. His team had been trying to crack it for weeks. I looked at it. Something moved in the back of my mind. The first 6 characters were a date. November 14th. Lily's birthday. The last 8 were a number I had not seen in years. My childhood home address. The room went very still. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then Jean said quietly, "You know this." I told him. Claire and I had been college roommates for 1 year during my 2nd year of school, before I transferred programs. We had been close in that particular intense way people sometimes are during the transitional years of their lives. Then distance separated us the way it does when there is no fight, just time. She had hidden the files using coordinates that only someone who knew her, who knew me specifically, would recognize. It was not carelessness. It was a deliberate choice. She had placed the most important thing she had behind a lock that only one specific person could open. She had trusted me. From across years of silence and distance, she had still trusted me. Jin's team retrieved the files within the hour. The room went quiet in a particular way when the files opened. It was the quiet of people confronting something large enough to rearrange their understanding of how the world operates. The documentation was everything Claire had built and more. Transaction records across 9 years. Shell company structures in 6 countries. The names of individuals who had authorized fund movements connected to 2 unsolved murders. A federal bribery case that had been filed and then, without public explanation, dropped. And the name of the official whose signature appeared on the order closing that investigation. I was standing behind Jin's shoulder when his analyst highlighted the name. I recognized it. It was the name of my assigned family court judge, Judge Carol Whitmore. She had presided over every preliminary motion in my custody case. She had dismissed my domestic violence evidence as insufficient. She had allowed Derek's legal team delays that no neutral judge would have permitted for even a moment. She had been quietly, methodically shaping the path toward Eleanor Harmon's preferred outcome, one ruling at a time. I had sat in that courtroom and felt the wrongness without being able to name it. Now I could name it. Jin's lawyer laid out the financial connection clearly. The documented link between the Harmon Foundation's network and an account connected to Judge Whitmore spanned 4 years of transactions. It was not ambiguous. It was not circumstantial. It was a paper trail a first-year prosecutor could follow without difficulty. But using Claire's files meant disclosing how they were obtained. It would expose enough of Jin's network's operational capabilities that his own activities would face federal scrutiny. And this was the piece that stopped the room. It would potentially destroy a federal investigation that had been building independently against the Harmon family for over 2 years. A federal agent made contact that afternoon. She came in person, identified herself, and spoke without ceremony. Her message was direct. They were 6 weeks from a sealed indictment. If we moved now, we burned the federal case and the Harmons walked on the major charges. Jean was completely still. The agent said, "We need you to stand down." I was at the back of the room. I had not planned to speak. Then I heard my own voice. "My custody hearing is in 18 hours, I said. "I cannot wait 6 weeks. Every face in the room turned to Jean. He made a decision that surprised everyone, including me. He called the federal agent back that evening. I was not in the room for the call. When he came out, he told me what he had offered. Everything. Claire's files. The full documentation his team had built over 14 months. Every piece, including records that touched the edges of his own operations, things that would open doors he had kept carefully closed for years. He asked for nothing except one thing. Not immunity. Not protection for himself. He asked for a federal emergency motion to halt my custody hearing pending judicial review of Judge Carol Whitmore's involvement in the Harmon financial network. The agent said she would make the call. The motion was granted at 11 o'clock that night. I was sitting on the hallway floor outside Lily's room when my lawyer called with the confirmation, close enough to hear my daughter breathing, unable to go in without waking her. My lawyer read the motion language in a voice that made clear she had not expected this outcome. Across the city, Eleanor Harmon's phone rang. Her lawyer spoke for less than 2 minutes. Eleanor sat for a long time after the call ended. Derek left a voicemail on my phone at 11:47. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. He said the custody case was never his idea. He said it had always been Eleanor's. He said he was frightened. I called him back the next day. We met in a parking garage, his suggestion. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way a person looks when the structure they have been leaning on begins to crack. He told me about Eleanor. How she had managed to shame about Grace for years. How the violence in our marriage had been shaped by her language. She makes you weak. You need to be firmer. Don't let her think she can simply leave. How he had been given a choice 2 days ago. Cooperate with his mother's defense or become her scapegoat. She had told him if the foundation case collapsed, she would let him face the full criminal exposure alone. He slid a folder across the hood of my car. A signed sworn statement. His cooperation agreement had been filed that morning. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. He said he knew it did not fix anything. No, I said. It doesn't. I took the folder. My phone buzzed on the drive home. A message from Jin's aide. 4 words. Eleanor is trying to run. She had a plan. She had probably always had one. A packed bag. A passport maintained under a secondary identity through a third-party legal structure she had held for over a decade. A car booked to a private airfield outside the city. She had used this route before in 2009 during an SEC inquiry that evaporated before it could reach her. She believed it would work again. She moved at 6 in the morning while the city was still quiet. The airfield gate had a car parked across it when she arrived. Jean stepped out. Alone. No visible security, though I learned later there were 3 additional cars positioned at the field perimeter. He did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. He stood in the gray morning light in front of her car and looked at her with that expression of his, the one that said he had already mapped every possible move in the conversation and had arranged the outcomes of each one. He said, "The FBI is approximately 7 minutes behind me. You can wait here with me, or you can return to the city. I am told the terms will be marginally more favorable if you choose that option." Eleanor Harmon looked at him. This woman who had managed politicians and buried evidence and controlled her son's shame like a business asset for 30 years. She was 71 years old, and she had never once in her life been outmaneuvered without a recovery path. She looked at the road. 3 sets of headlights were visible in the distance, closing fast. She smoothed the front of her coat. She said, "I want my lawyer." At that exact moment, across the city, the gate of the Harmon family estate opened from the inside. Claire walked out on her own 2 feet. She stood in the morning air and breathed. Then she called Jin's aid from memory. The gate had been opened by Derek. By dawn it was over. Eleanor was in federal custody. Judge Carol Whitmore was removed from the bench by end of business, pending formal investigation. Dr. Penn submitted a full cooperation statement to the court before noon, trading his license and his freedom for reduced exposure. His statement confirmed every piece of what Jin's team had already documented. Derek was not arrested. His cooperation agreement was signed and sealed. His freedom was conditional, narrow, and carefully monitored. The Harmon name, the foundation board seat, the legal infrastructure that had protected him for years, all of it gone by the time the sun was fully up. I watched the breaking news on my phone at my kitchen table. Lily was beside me eating cereal, feet swinging, completely uninterested in the television. She was telling me about a dream involving a purple horse that could solve math problems. I was half listening to her and half watching Eleanor Harmon's photograph appear on screen with the word arrested beneath it. Lily tilted her head and looked at me. "Mommy," she said, "you look different." I looked at her, this small, fearless, dragon-drawing, star-sticker-wearing person who had been the reason for every single hard choice I had made in the last 4 years, and I felt something release in my chest. Something I had been holding so long I had forgotten the weight of it until it was gone. "I feel different, baby," I said. My phone rang. My lawyer. The custody case had been formally dismissed. She paused. Then she said, "You may want to sit down for this next part." I was already sitting. The Harmon Estates civil liability team was beginning settlement discussions, and I was listed as a primary damages party. The preliminary number had 7 figures. After I hung up, I sat at the table for a long time. Lily finished her cereal. She climbed into my lap, which she had not done in months, and pressed her ear against my chest. She said, "Your heart is beating really loud today, Mommy." "I know, baby," I said. "Is it happy loud or scared loud?" I put my arms around her and held on. "Happy loud," I said. "Very, very happy loud." The war was over. What came after was quieter and more complicated, and in some ways more important than any of the battle. Gene had been called in for federal interviews, not charges, but questions. His cooperation had purchased significant goodwill with the investigators, but his world was still what it was. The documentation he had provided had cleaned certain edges. It had not changed the fundamental shape of his life or the nature of what he did. We had a conversation about it. A real one. I want to describe it accurately because I think it matters. He told me he was not going to pretend he could become something different. He said his world was complicated and that being close to him would always carry a version of that risk. He was not asking for understanding he had not earned. He was simply stating what was true. I told him that what he had done, not just stepping forward at the gala, not just the resources and protection, but the decision to hand the FBI everything at significant personal cost, had shown me something I had needed to see. That power used with intention and care was completely different from power used as a weapon. That I had lived inside one version of it, and I now understood the difference in a way I could not have explained before. He listened to all of it without interrupting. For me, after years of being talked over and corrected and diminished, that felt like the most intimate thing a person could do. I told him I needed to build my own stability, my own ground, my own version of whatever I had learned from watching him move through the world with certainty. He said he understood. Then he reached into his jacket. I thought he was reaching for a document, something administrative. He placed a receipt on the table between us. It was dated 6 months before the gala. It was for a pair of hearing aids. The amount matched Lily's exactly. I stared at it. My throat tightened. He told me his team had been monitoring the Harmon family's financial activity for 14 months before the gala. In that monitoring, they had pulled related records, including Derek's legal campaign against my finances. One of his analysts had flagged my case in routine review. An ex-wife being systematically financially destroyed. A minor child with documented medical needs. Legal representation provided by a firm on the Harmon payroll. Gene had never met me. He had only seen a file. He had authorized an anonymous payment through a medical charity fund he maintained as part of his legitimate financial infrastructure. He framed it as something unremarkable. Then he said, "My brother had a daughter. She was 4 years old when he died. I was not there when it mattered. I could not find her in time. I asked what had happened to her. He said she was safe, with family, but he had not been there." The receipt was still on the table. I picked it up and looked at the donor line. An English name I did not recognize. I had always wondered about the anonymous donor on Lily's paperwork. I had looked it up once and moved on because I had too many other things pressing. I looked at Gene. "The foundation name listed on this donation," I said slowly. There were Korean characters in the formal name. I found a translation once. He waited. "So she can hear her mother's voice." I set the receipt down. My hands were not steady. The room was very quiet. I did not plan to bring Lily to his office. I was returning a final piece of settlement paperwork, something administrative, the last document in a long chain of documents. Lily was with me because I had no other arrangement that afternoon. She held my hand in the elevator and talked about whether clouds had feelings and whether they minded being walked through by airplanes. When we walked in, Gene was standing at the window. He looked at Lily the way people sometimes look at something that catches them entirely off guard, a moment of recalibration before the composure resettles. Lily looked at him. She had her own internal filing system for people, and she had apparently already placed him in a category. She dropped my hand, walked across the room, stopped in front of him, and said, "Are you the one who paid for my ears?" The room went so quiet I could hear the ventilation. Gene crouched down to her level. Something moved in his face, beneath the composure, real and uncontrolled. He said, "Yes." Lily considered this for 4 full seconds with the seriousness of a 5-year-old weighing something important. Then she placed her small hand on his jaw. "Thank you," she said. "I can hear the birds now." I turned toward the window. I was not going to cry in his office. I completely cried in his office. 6 months later, everything had changed. Lily and I were in our new house, not rented, ours. 3 bedrooms. A front porch. A backyard with real grass, where she ran in her rubber boots every single morning for reasons she never fully explained. I was halfway through a dental hygiene certification program. Lily was thriving, new school, new friends, sleeping through the night, laughing the way children laugh when they have forgotten to be afraid. Claire was living 3 blocks away. We had rebuilt our friendship slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild things that were broken and then found again, with attention and patience and the understanding that what you are making is something new, not a restoration of the old. She was preparing to testify in the federal trial. She was scared and steady at once. Grace had given her name publicly. She had told her story in a detailed interview that ran in 3 national publications. The response had been significant and, from everything I could tell, something close to healing. Derek was somewhere quiet, attending what he was required to attend. Eleanor Harmon was awaiting trial. One Saturday morning, I stood on my porch with coffee while Lily ran circuits around the backyard in her boots. The certification program was going well. The nonprofit I had been quietly building, free legal support and transitional housing for women leaving abusive situations, had just received its formal registration. I had named it after Grace's middle name. With her blessing. My phone buzzed. No name. The sign looks good. I looked up. Across the street, a black car was idling at the curb. I smiled. I did not go out. He did not come in. Some things are exactly what they are. And that is enough. I went back to Lily. I chased her around the yard in my socks until she was shrieking with laughter, and the neighbors were probably wondering what had gotten into us. The car stayed a little while longer. Then it was gone. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not watch it leave with fear. I watched it go with the particular piece of a woman who has stopped waiting to be safe and decided that she already is. If this story moved you, if there was a single moment that stopped your breath or made you feel something you needed to feel, then you already understand what it means to watch someone stop surviving and start living. Stories like this one exist because women choose to speak. Because real protection shows up quietly and stays. Because children deserve to hear the birds. Before you go, drop your location in the comments. Tell me where in the world you watched this story from. I read every single comment and I want to know who is in this community with me. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I have so many more stories coming, every single one about women who walked through fire and came out holding something worth protecting. I will see you in the next one.